My sister mocked me at brunch, never realizing she was applying for a job at the company I'd built. I sat in my usual corner at the brunch place my family had gone to for years, the one with the green-tiled floors and the scent of burnt espresso that somehow made everyone nostalgic. My coffee had gone cold 10 minutes ago, but I kept stirring it slowly, rhythmically, as if the motion alone could keep me from cracking. Around me, forks clinked, chairs scraped, and laughter floated through the air. Though not mine. The spotlight, as always, belonged to my sister Sabrina. She sat with her legs crossed at the head of the table, sunlight catching the diamond ring on her finger, as if it too knew where to shine. "Your old job really was a snooze fest," she said, laughing a little too loud. Honestly, it's kind of hilarious that someone in their 30s still doesn't have a real job. The words landed softly on the tablecloth, but echoed sharp in my chest. No one else laughed, just Sabrina. She was always her own best audience. I didn't look at her. I just pressed my lips together and kept stirring the coffee, round and round, in a cup no one seemed to notice was still full. My mother, bless her, mumbled something like, "Sabrina, don't be like that," but it rolled off my sister like water off glass. To her, silence was an admission of failure. And I'd always been the quiet one. My father tried to redirect with a comment about the eggs Benedict being too salty, but Sabrina's smirk lingered, like a line of code looping until it broke something. I didn't respond. I never did at family gatherings. I suppose that made it easy for them to assume I had nothing worth saying. But the truth was, I had learned to build entire worlds in silence. Worlds none of them could begin to imagine. While they talked, I built. While they celebrated spotlight moments, I debugged systems no one knew were broken. The first time I realized not everything powerful needed to be seen, I was 27. Sitting beside my best friend Jake Foster in our cramped apartment, both of us hunched over secondhand laptops, typing the first lines of code that would eventually become Datalume's core architecture. We didn't know it yet, but what we were building would change the way hospitals interpreted data, how banks assessed risk, how public systems anticipated needs. But back then it was just two guys and an idea that no one had asked for. Now, I'm 33, the silent co-founder of a company valued at over $80 million, 0 cents. No one in my family knows. I never appeared on the website. In every interview, Jake was the face of the company. And I chose to stay behind the curtain. My name shows up only on internal files, legal documents, and Sabrina's pay stub. The same sister who had always mocked my quietness is now applying for a position at the company I helped build, unaware that the person reviewing her resume is the failure she's laughed at for years. She kept talking. Something about how her last firm folded, but it wasn't her fault. "I'm a problem solver," she said with a toss of her hair. "I already applied to Datalume. Heard they're hiring." My hands stopped stirring, just for a moment. Then I resumed. I didn't want the flicker in my eye to betray me. "If they bring me in," she went on, "I'll run their budget better than anyone there. If they pass me up, it's their loss." I bit my tongue to keep from smiling. That tone, that smugness, was the same one she used on me as a kid, when she said I'd never amount to anything sitting in my room with old computers. Maybe she still believed that. Maybe she always would. But what she didn't know was that while she was chasing the next stage light, I had already built the entire theater. I still remember my 12th birthday with unnerving clarity. The cake had 12 crooked candles flickering under the ceiling fan, and my mom had just finished singing the last off-key note of Happy Birthday when Sabrina burst through the living room holding a trophy half her size. "Our star just won the state dance competition," she shouted, beaming. My mom gasped like she'd just witnessed a miracle. She rushed to hug her, arms wide, voice high, pride pouring out of every syllable. I was still standing behind the cake, hands neatly folded, the flame on my candles dancing alone in the silence. No one asked me what I wished for. I didn't blow them out. I just quietly picked up my gifts, walked to my room, and opened the old laptop Dad had handed down to me the year before. Screen cracked, keys sticky, and I went back to working on my first data model. It wasn't a game, it wasn't flashy, but it made sense. Numbers always made sense, even when people didn't. As a kid, I used to take apart remote-controlled cars just to see how they worked, not to break them, just to understand. I'd spend hours trying to figure out why one video game ran smoother than another. I remember the first time I wrote a basic script that made the family computer sort files by type. No one noticed. Sabrina, on the other hand, couldn't sneeze without being told she was gifted. My mom would say, "Sabrina's got star quality," while patting my head and adding, "And Caleb, he's quiet, but that's okay too." Dad used to joke, We've got a firework and a flashlight under one roof. No one ever asked which was which. They didn't need to. Sabrina lit up rooms. I just kept them from going dark. By the time we were teenagers, the gap between us wasn't just emotional, it was visible. Sabrina had magazine clippings taped to her bedroom walls, posters from local theater shows where she always got lead roles. I had algorithm diagrams pinned over my desk, notebooks full of code and questions like, how do neural nets mimic human learning? No one ever asked about those. When I graduated with a degree in computer science from a technical institute in Spokane, the only family member who showed up was Uncle Dean, and only because he was already in town for a fishing trip. My parents were busy helping Sabrina launch her boutique fashion line. I didn't feel angry, I felt invisible. But there's a strange kind of peace in invisibility, because when no one's watching, you're free to build without judgment. That freedom became the foundation of Dataloom. Jake and I had nothing but 2 beat-up laptops and a shared belief that we could build a platform capable of interpreting real-time behavior across industries. He was the speaker, the negotiator, the name people remembered. I was the guy fixing server crashes at 2 a.m., rewriting back-end code after everyone else had logged off, and that was how I liked it. 1 year in, we signed a trial contract with a regional bank. 2 years in, hospitals started using our predictive modules. By year 3, we were valued at $83 million, 0 cents, and I quietly held 49% of it. But ask anyone on the street who built Dataloom, and they'd say Jake Foster. Caleb Morgan, never heard of him, and I didn't mind, because while Sabrina chased stage lights and magazine features, I was shaping something that would outlast both applause and headlines. And now, Sabrina, once the firework, was applying for a job in the very structure I'd built line by line. She'd walk through doors whose architecture I had mapped, review budgets I had silently approved, and drink coffee from the machine I'd personally installed in the break room when no one else bothered. I wasn't bitter, not really. I just wondered, when she finally saw my name in the system, would she recognize it? Would she finally see what I had built, or just assume someone else had done the real work, as she always had? The apartment we worked from had no air conditioning, 2 mismatched chairs, and a view of a brick wall so uninspiring it became a joke between us. Jake used to say, if we can build an empire here, we can build it anywhere, and I'd nod, tapping away on my keyboard, because I didn't need inspiration, I needed function. That place saw our first crash, our first breakthrough, and the day our prototype didn't just run, it predicted a behavior pattern with 94% accuracy. I remember that moment better than any birthday. Jake jumped up, yelled something about changing the game, and I just sat there, watching the screen, heart pounding in my chest, because for the first time I saw something work exactly the way I dreamed it could. Dataloom was never about the money. It was about giving people the tools to see clearly, to spot risk, prevent loss, allocate resources smarter. It started with a small goal: help a credit union better understand loan defaults. Within a year, our algorithm was reducing bad debt by nearly 40%. That was when banks took notice. And when the first contract came, a $600,000 0 cents pilot, I didn't celebrate. I upgraded our servers, cleaned up the messy back-end code, and restructured the data flow. While Jake was flying to meet investors, I was writing the logic that would become the backbone of every module we'd launch after. He was the face of Dataloom, I was its skeleton. I didn't attend press conferences, I didn't even have a public email address. It was Jake who got quoted in Wired and Bloomberg, Jake who stood in front of graphs at investor demos. But when a system failed or a client's dashboard crashed during a high-stakes pitch, the late-night call didn't go to him, it came to me. And I always answered, always fixed it before morning. My name never appeared in headlines, and I made sure it didn't. We agreed early on that Dataloom's public face would be singular, Jake Foster. It simplified media, brand voice, and investor relations. I signed the papers without hesitation, because to me, anonymity wasn't a burden, it was armor. I saw what happened to people who chased recognition too early. They got distracted. They started optimizing for attention instead of results. That wasn't going to be me. I didn't care about magazine covers. I cared about uptime percentages, clean data streams, and audit-proof transparency. That was the architecture I'd built, silently, precisely, relentlessly. By the time year 3 rolled around, we had clients in healthcare, education, government. Our models were helping triage patients more efficiently in emergency rooms, They were catching fraudulent activity in grant programs before it reached human review, and while Jake was shaking hands at conferences, I was tuning the predictive engine late into the night. Sometimes I'd close my laptop at 4 a.m. and stare at the ceiling, wondering if this was what success felt like. Tired, unseen, but deeply certain you were building something that mattered. The money came, yes, but the feeling that really stuck was when a small-town hospital administrator emailed to say our dashboard helped her spot a supply shortage 3 days before it would have endangered patients. That was worth more than any headline. And now Dataloom had become its own ecosystem. New hires, internal tools, layers of management. Sabrina, unaware, uninvited, and completely unprepared, was about to walk into this machine and touch the very systems I'd designed from nothing. She thought she was applying to a company run by a guy she'd never heard of. She didn't know the second co-founder was her younger brother, the one she once mocked for fixing printers instead of going to parties. And as I reviewed her resume on our internal portal, I wasn't angry. I wasn't smug. I was simply curious. How would Sabrina fare in a world built by someone she never truly saw? It was almost funny, in that strange cosmic way where life folds back on itself and serves you a moment so ironic it feels scripted. Sabrina sat across from me at brunch, balancing her phone in one hand and a mimosa in the other, casually announcing her next move like it was just another performance. I applied to a new firm last week, she said, tossing her hair. Dataloom. Ever heard of it? Word is they're doing something cool with data and AI. I figured it was time I aimed higher. I didn't say a word. I didn't flinch. I just kept stirring my coffee, the spoon tapping gently against the porcelain like a metronome keeping time with my heartbeat. They're growing fast, she continued, and from what I've read, they need someone who actually understands how to manage a budget. Lucky for them, I do. She took a sip and smiled wide like she'd already landed the job. If they pass on me, their loss, but honestly, they'd be stupid not to bring me in. There it was, that tone. The same one she used on me when we were teenagers and she'd walk past my room, roll her eyes at the code on my screen and say, "All that time on the computer, Caleb, you really think that's going to take you anywhere?" I remember every version of that line, slightly reworded, differently dressed, but always with the same core belief, that I was wasting time, chasing shadows, hiding from the world. And yet here we were. She had no idea that Dataloom wasn't just a name I knew, it was mine. That the algorithm she referenced, the AI system she half understood, the internal structure she hoped to improve, they were all built by the brother she barely saw standing in front of her. When I got home that night, I logged into our internal dashboard. HR had flagged a new application, Sabrina Morgan. I clicked open the file, and there she was, smiling in a beige blazer, professional yet performative, her resume bold in all the usual ways. Years at a now-defunct accounting firm, a short-lived fashion startup she didn't mention. Buzzwords lined up like dominoes. Under reviewer notes, someone had written, "Strong communicator, confident, potential fit for budget analyst role, recommend for next round." I didn't hesitate. I clicked approve. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't charity, it was curiosity. I wanted to see who she would become in a space where no one clapped when she walked in. No spotlight, no pedestal. Just tasks, numbers, expectations. She wouldn't know I was behind the approval. She wouldn't know that the layout of her onboarding packet, the projects she'd soon work on, the very coffee machine she'd use, all carried my fingerprint. Jake, of course, knew. We'd agreed early on never to share my identity with staff. He'd once said, "Caleb, if you ever want to reveal it, it has to mean something." And now, Sabrina's presence made me wonder, would it? Or would it just spark more drama? On her first day, I didn't show up. I never did before 6 p.m. Instead, I turned on the internal camera I'd personally installed on the 9th floor. There she was, standing near the espresso machine, scanning the digital project board. "This place is sleek," she said to a colleague, "but get this, no one's ever seen one of the founders. Total ghost." She laughed. He might not even be real, just a legal placeholder. I leaned back in my chair and let out the softest chuckle. She had no idea, none. That was the irony. The sister who'd always believed I was invisible had stepped right into the heart of everything I had created and still didn't see me. But that was fine, because if there's one thing I've learned about truth, it doesn't always need to be spoken. Sometimes it just waits. The thing about systems, especially ones you built yourself, is that you can feel when someone's looking too closely. 2 weeks after Sabrina started, I noticed a subtle spike in document access logs. Nothing blatant, just small things. A timestamp here, a user ID there. She was reading more than just her assigned materials. She was poking around, following digital breadcrumbs she didn't know were mine. I watched it unfold the way a chess player watches an opponent pause over a piece they shouldn't touch yet. She had stumbled onto the approval chain for a recent marketing proposal, one that had my digital signature on it, C. Morgan/NS. I'd always signed documents that way, NS for Node Shadow, a name I gave myself during our early coding marathons when Jake joked I was like a ghost in the machine. She must have seen it and tilted her head the way she used to when she thought a teacher gave her a trick question, and I knew Sabrina curiosity was her soft spot. If she couldn't immediately place something, she'd chase it down like a challenge. I also knew what came next. 3 days later, in the cafe downstairs, I sat behind a wooden divider with my coffee when I heard her voice. "Who's this NS person anyway?" she asked a young analyst. "They sign off on everything important, but no one's ever met them." Her colleague laughed awkwardly. "Ghost in the system," he said. "Probably just a legal placeholder, some founder hiding in a bunker." Sabrina didn't laugh. She smirked, but there was something else behind it. An edge of suspicion? She didn't believe in placeholders. Never had. If she couldn't see it, she didn't trust it. That was the irony, wasn't it? She never trusted what she couldn't see, yet her entire job now operated under approvals she didn't realize were mine. And still, she hadn't connected the dots. Until that Thursday afternoon, I got the system alert at 3:41 p.m. Internal access request, Sabrina Morgan, folder, Financial Core Records, Q3. My eyes narrowed slightly. She had requested access to the full budget structure. Not her job scope, but with her clearance level, she could open it. I waited. 10 minutes. 15. Then another alert. Document opened. Signatory history, Morgan/NS. I could picture it vividly, her sitting at her desk. Screen glow casting soft blue light across her face. Lips slightly parted. Eyes locked on the line. Approved by Caleb Morgan, co-founder, 50% equity, chief technical architect. That must have hit like a detonation, not because she understood the depth of what that meant, but because for the first time, the shadow she'd spent her life looking past had a name. My name. She didn't storm through the office, didn't send a confrontational message. No. Sabrina was dramatic only when it served her. But when shocked, she went quiet, still. And that, I knew, was more dangerous than noise. The next day I went in earlier than usual. Something told me I needed to. The office was mostly empty, quiet in that post-lunch lull where even the coffee machines seemed to rest. I walked toward the pantry to grab water when I saw her. Standing there, alone, holding a printed sheet in her hand, shoulders rigid, eyes burning into the page. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, she froze. "Caleb," she said, voice low, guarded. "What are you doing down here?" I raised an eyebrow, kept my tone light, just grabbing something. This area's not off limits. She narrowed her eyes. "Only senior management has clearance to this floor." I smiled, not smug, just steady. "Yeah, I know." She was about to say something when Jake appeared behind me, holding a folder. "Hey Caleb, can you take a look at the new AI deployment brief? Needs your sign-off before Friday." I took it from him and turned back to her. Her face had gone pale. Eyes flicked from Jake to me, then back again. Something had cracked. The idea she'd carried her whole life, that I was the quiet, drifting younger brother, was no longer holding. Not here, not in this world I had built. The server room in the basement was the one place I went when I needed to breathe. Not because it was quiet. It always hummed with the low static of a dozen machines. But because it was mine. I designed its layout, chose the racks, ran the cables myself when we couldn't afford a third engineer. And somehow, even after 5 years and $83 million, 0 cents in valuation, I still went there every Friday evening, checking security logs, running silent updates, being the invisible architect I'd always been. That's why I noticed the footsteps before the door opened, a pair of heels, sharp, echoing, hesitant at first, then firmer. I stepped out from behind the main console just as she entered, and there she was, frozen, eyes wide, breath caught. "Caleb?" she asked, like the room itself had conjured me. I nodded once, calmly, not surprised. Her voice dropped half an octave. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I reached over to the panel, clicked off the backup fan noise, and turned to face her fully. "I have access," I said. That was all. She looked around, suddenly unsure of the space she had stepped into. "This is senior only. IT infrastructure, finance level clearance." Her eyes narrowed. "You're not just some back-end developer, are you?" Before I could speak, Jake appeared from the adjacent hall, holding a thick folder marked AI Deployment Plan, Q4. "Hey, Caleb," he said casually, not even noticing the tension in the air. "Can you review this before Monday?" I took the file, nodded, then glanced back at her. Her eyes had gone completely still. She wasn't blinking. The pieces were rearranging themselves behind her stare. "You're the co-founder," she finally said, voice a whisper. "You've been here the whole time." I didn't nod. I didn't need to. Her face said it all. Anger, confusion, embarrassment, maybe even something deeper, betrayal, though I'd never betrayed her. I just didn't let her see. "How long?" she asked, voice trembling just enough to make it real. "Since the beginning," I replied. "Jake and I started this company in a rented office near Capitol Hill, back when you thought I was unemployed and wasting my life." Her jaw clenched, but it wasn't aimed at me. It was something else. Herself, maybe. A memory she didn't want to replay. "So, all this time," she said slowly, "you were reviewing my work, signing my checks, watching me talk about your company like I knew what I was saying." I held the folder in both hands, kept my posture steady. "You're capable, Sabrina. That's why I approved your promotion. If you weren't, I would have done the opposite. This isn't about pride, it's about performance." She looked away for the first time, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. Then I pulled a sheet of paper from the folder, one I'd tucked there earlier that morning. It was a project proposal for a new community initiative, tech education for underprivileged students. I handed it to her gently. "We're launching this next month. It'll need someone to run the budgeting and reporting side. I think you'd be a good fit." She didn't take it, not yet, but she looked at it. Really looked, and I saw something shift. She wasn't crying. She wasn't storming out. She was standing still. But this time, not out of superiority, out of realization. I didn't say more, just turned and walked back toward the elevator, leaving the door open behind me. She needed time, and I needed to breathe. Not because I'd revealed something, but because for the first time, she had actually seen me. The following Monday morning, I arrived at the office earlier than I had in months. Not for a meeting, not to approve documents. I just had a feeling, one I couldn't shake. The same quiet pull that had led me to open our first server hub at midnight, or refactor our predictive engine for the 5th time when no one asked. I stepped off the elevator on the 10th floor and headed straight to the small glass conference room we rarely used, just to finish something personal. Inside a drawer, I kept a walnut box I'd had since college. I opened it, took out a navy linen notebook, a black fountain pen, and a folded card. But before I could write more than a few words, I heard footsteps. Not rushed, measured. I turned. She was standing there, arms crossed, a single sheet of paper in her hand. "Is this real?" she asked quietly, holding up the document. The founding record of Dataloom, complete with my name, my role, my stake. Her eyes were sharp now, no longer confused, just tired of pretending. I nodded. Every line of it, she didn't move. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you tell me?" I set the pen down slowly, because I didn't need anyone to know. I didn't want recognition, Sabrina. I wanted freedom, to build, to think, to make something without it being about me. She gave a short laugh, hollow and bitter. "So instead you let me walk in here like an idiot. You let me brag, mock, apply for a job in your house like I knew something." Her voice cracked. "You let me humiliate myself." "No," I said gently. "You didn't humiliate yourself. You showed up, you worked, and you've done well. You didn't get here because I gave you a shortcut. You earned every piece." She sat down slowly, like her legs suddenly forgot how to hold her up. Her fingers unfolded the founding paper again, smoothing it over the table as if she needed the texture to believe it. "All those years," she whispered, "I thought you were the one who disappeared, but you were just building something I never bothered to look for." I stayed quiet. There was nothing I could say that would mean more than her saying that aloud. After a moment, I slid the proposal for the Tech Education Initiative across the table again. "We still need someone for this, someone who gets numbers but also understands the human side. I meant it when I said you'd be a good fit." She stared at it, not with pride, not with defiance, but with a kind of humbled curiosity I'd never seen in her before. For the first time in maybe 2 decades, she wasn't performing. She was just listening. I stood, picked up the notebook and pen I hadn't finished writing in, and tucked them back into the box. As I walked toward the door, I paused, one hand resting lightly on the frame. "You don't have to take it," I said, "but it's there if you're ready." She didn't respond. And I didn't wait. I left the room without drama, without declaration, because I knew the real shift had already begun, not in what she said, but in what she didn't say. Behind me, the silence didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like space, finally open, finally possible, and for the first time, I believed she might walk through it. The anniversary gala was held in a glass building by Lake Union, where chandelier light rippled across marble floors like water disturbed by wind. Jake had pulled every string to make the event look effortless. Silver linens, curated jazz trio, branded cupcakes with edible Dadaloom logos. I stood in the guest dressing room, staring at my reflection in the mirror. A tailored black suit, clean cut, minimalist but precise. My tie was slightly crooked. I fixed it twice, then gave up. My hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from knowing the moment had finally arrived, the one I'd avoided for 5 years, the one I couldn't push any further. Jake knocked gently. "You ready?" I shook my head with a half smile. "Not really." He laughed. "Good. No one ever is." We walked together along the back corridor, the buzz of conversation growing louder with each step. On stage, the MC had just finished his intro. "And now," he announced, "please welcome the 2 co-founders of Dadaloom, Samuel Foster and Caleb Morgan." Applause erupted, loud, eager, unaware of what they were about to see. Jake stepped out first. I followed, the lights hitting my face like a warm slap. For a heartbeat, I couldn't see the crowd, just shapes. Then it cleared, and there she was, standing at the back of the room, next to the farthest pillar. One hand held a glass of champagne she hadn't touched. The other gripped the railing beside her like she needed something solid. Her face, frozen, disarmed, stunned. I knew that feeling. I'd lived it. The moment when something you dismissed becomes undeniably real. Jake spoke first. He told our story. The garage days, the sleepless nights, the first crash, the first check, the first real scare when a client nearly walked. He made people laugh, nod, clap at all the right beats. Then he passed the mic to me. The room hushed. The kind of hush that doesn't ask you to impress, just to be honest. I took a breath. "Hi, I'm Caleb Morgan," I said, "and for many of you, this is probably the first time you've seen me in person." A ripple of surprised laughter. Not mocking, warm, curious. I went on. "I'm not great at public speaking. I never imagined I'd be up here, but 5 years ago, Jake and I had 2 things, an idea and a belief, that we could build something useful, something responsible. Not flashy, just quietly transformative." I scanned the crowd. Most were smiling, nodding, but my eyes landed on one face only. Sabrina hadn't moved. Her eyes were locked on me. Not cold, not proud, just seeing. Really seeing. Like she was trying to recognize someone whose features she had known for years, but whose shape she never truly studied. "I know I'm not the face of this company," I said, "but I've been in every line of code, every contract, every late-night decision. I stayed behind the curtain, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to work without noise." More applause, rising and falling like a tide. I nodded, handed the mic back, and stepped aside. As the lights shifted to dinner, I moved off stage, weaving through handshakes and compliments. "Didn't think you were real," one software engineer joked. "We called you the wizard behind the curtain." I smiled, answered politely, but my thoughts kept circling back to the corner of the room, now empty. Sabrina was gone. I didn't know when she'd left, or how much of the speech she'd heard. But I felt it. Something had changed. Not publicly, not grandly, quietly, like a needle shifting inside a compass, a silence that no longer hid judgment, but made room for respect. 2 days after the gala, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, not for a meeting, not to check in with legal or update the core logs, just to finish something personal. I stepped into the 10th floor conference room, the one with the drawer I never let anyone use, and took out the walnut box. The air in the room was still, the city just beginning to blink into life outside the glass. I opened the notebook I'd chosen days ago. Linen cover, blank cream pages, soft but weighty. I uncapped the black fountain pen, let it rest in my palm for a second, and finally wrote. Not a speech, not an apology, just a few honest lines. Sabrina, thank you for your efforts at Data Loom. You're truly capable. I believe you'll go far. I'm proud to work with you, even if we began in silence. Caleb. I folded the card gently, slipped it inside the notebook, placed the pen diagonally across it, then closed the cover. The box clicked shut like the final line of code in a stable release. Outside the room, I found one of our internal delivery assistants. Can you deliver this to Sabrina Morgan? I asked. No sender name, just hand it to her directly. She nodded without question and walked off. I didn't wait for a thank you. I didn't expect one. The gift wasn't a peace treaty, it was a door. A silent one with no pressure to enter, but open, nonetheless. The rest of the week passed uneventfully. She didn't mention the box. No email, no message, but I noticed things. Small, unspoken things. Sabrina no longer leaned back in meetings with crossed arms. She began sitting forward. Took notes. Asked sharp questions. During a budget review session for a new AI deployment team, she didn't try to dominate. She listened first, then spoke with clarity I hadn't seen before. Her voice was still confident, but no longer wrapped in performance. It carried weight now because it carried intention. One afternoon, I paused outside the glass meeting room while she presented a revised financial projection for a project that had gone 12% over budget. Her tone was steady, her data precise, her recommendations realistic. She didn't defer, but she didn't brag either. She stood in front of the team, hands calm, eyes clear, and when someone pushed back on her math, she didn't flinch. She explained, she even admitted an oversight. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. She wasn't trying to win anymore. She was just doing the work. The following week, HR forwarded me a new proposal, a sponsorship initiative designed to mentor junior employees, particularly young women entering the tech space. The name of the program? Touch the Screen. Touch the Future. I read the tagline again. Beneath it, in italics, she had written, Inspired by the quiet mission of Caleb Morgan. I set the file down and closed my eyes for a second, not because I was emotional, but because I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Release. Like a tension I'd carried for years had finally exhaled. That afternoon, I walked into the pantry at the same time she was pouring hot water into a tea carafe. She turned and saw me. For a heartbeat, we both froze. Then her gaze softened. No sharpness. No armor. I was about to pass when she said quietly, The pen is beautiful, and the notebook, I've already filled a few pages. I turned to her. I'm glad you liked it. She gave a small nod, then hesitated. I don't think I ever really understood you, or maybe I just never tried. I smiled, not because I won, but because for the first time, she wasn't trying to win either. You didn't have to give me a chance, she added, voice lower, but you did. And you never used it to make me small. That says more about you than anything else ever could. And in that moment, I didn't see the teenager with the trophy anymore. I saw a woman learning to stand still and see. After that afternoon in the pantry, nothing between us was declared. No new titles, no long conversations, just a kind of understanding that began to ripple out into the space between us. One decision, one gesture, one small shift at a time. Sabrina didn't try to claim more space. She gave it. In meetings, she'd pause to invite quieter voices in. In group chats, she began tagging interns to encourage their ideas, even when they weren't polished. One Friday, I caught the tail end of a conversation where she offered to mentor a new hire. Not for show, not because anyone asked her, but because the young woman had reminded her of someone who had something to say, but no one ever really listened. I didn't interrupt. I just passed by the glass and nodded slightly. She didn't see me. But that wasn't the point. As for me, I stopped hiding quite as much. I began showing up to technical briefings in person. Not every time, but often enough for people to get used to seeing me as more than a name in metadata. I gave feedback in real time, answered questions, shared how we'd failed before we succeeded. I even said yes when a university asked me to speak to a group of engineering students. The day before the talk, I almost backed out. But Jake looked at me across the table and said, You don't need to inspire them, Caleb. You just need to tell the truth. And that's what I did. I stood in front of 62 students and told them that building something real often meant being overlooked for years, that progress wasn't a straight line, that success in silence is still success. Then came the moment that made everything feel strangely full circle. One late afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I passed by the recognition wall. Every quarter, we updated it with names of top contributors. I hadn't checked it in days, but when I looked up, I saw hers. Sabrina Morgan, Q2 lead contributor. Beneath her name in gold text was the note: for leading the Touch the Future initiative and restructuring our AI budget with precision and empathy. I didn't say anything, just stood there, reading it again. A minute later, I heard footsteps. She appeared beside me, jacket over one arm, tote bag in the other. We stood side by side, both staring at the wall. Then she looked at me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled gently. We're just getting started. That Sunday, the family gathered again for brunch. Same spot, same table, same smell of warm waffles and burnt espresso. But something in the air felt different. I arrived early, as usual. My parents were already there, chatting about garden renovations. Uncle Ron and Aunt Liz arrived next, with their usual chaotic energy and mismatched sunglasses. Then, 5 minutes late but not dramatically so, Sabrina walked in. She wore a simple white blouse, dark jeans, hair tied neatly, no makeup, no statement earrings, no dramatic entrance. Just her. She walked toward me, eyes pausing for a moment before she gave a small nod. I returned it. No words, just a look. And that was enough. Halfway through the meal, as my mom was talking about her new flower bed, Uncle Ron leaned over with a chuckle. "So Caleb," he said, grinning, "are you still doing that little freelance thing from home, or just typing up random computer codes all day?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Sabrina beat me to it. "Uncle," she said clearly, setting her coffee cup down, "Caleb is the smartest person I've ever known, and without him I wouldn't be where I am today." The table fell silent, all eyes on her, but she didn't shrink. Her voice didn't shake. She looked straight ahead and continued. "I used to think being loud meant being right, but Caleb taught me something better: humility. His quietness doesn't mean he has nothing to say. It means he's too busy building something that lasts." Uncle Ron blinked. Aunt Liz nodded slowly. My mother reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. I didn't say anything. I just looked at Sabrina. And in that look was everything that didn't need to be said. An apology unspoken, gratitude finally blooming, and a respect not earned by title, but by truth. Sunday came around like it always did, but this time the air felt softer. The sun filtering through the striped curtains at the corner brunch spot wasn't any brighter, and the smell of warm waffles hadn't changed. But something else had. A shift too subtle to describe, yet impossible to miss. I arrived early, as usual, slid into the same corner seat I always chose. The coffee in front of me was still too hot to drink. I didn't stir it. My parents were already mid-conversation about whether to replace the backyard swing with a rose trellis. Uncle Ron was quoting some sports stat no one asked for. Aunt Liz chimed in with stories about her cat's new diet, and for once, I didn't feel like the background. I was simply there, present, known. Sabrina arrived 5 minutes late, just like the last time. But this wasn't the same entrance. There were no heels clicking, no oversized sunglasses, no dramatic coat. She wore a soft ivory sweater, dark jeans, hair tied back in a low knot. Clean, simple, real. She walked up to the table, her eyes meeting mine just before she sat beside me. No fanfare, just a quiet nod. I returned it, the kind of look that doesn't ask for permission, just offers presence. The meal flowed the way family meals always do, messy, overlapping, filled with half-finished stories and someone forgetting who ordered what. But it was calm. At one point, Mom reached for the syrup and knocked over her water. Sabrina caught the glass before it spilled across the table. "Nice reflexes," I said without thinking. She smiled, a real one. "Budget training," she replied. And then it happened. Almost as if the universe needed to bring it full circle. Uncle Ron leaned back in his chair, patted his stomach, and turned toward me with a familiar smirk. "So, Caleb," he said, the same old tone as always, "you still tinkering with those little codes? Or did you finally get yourself a real job?" I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from no longer needing to explain. But before I could answer, Sabrina spoke up. "No," she said clearly, her fork resting gently beside her plate. "He didn't get a real job. He built a real company." The entire table turned to her. She didn't waver. "Caleb's the co-founder of Data Loom, The systems most of you see on the news, the ones predicting hospital trends, detecting fraud, improving city logistics, that's his code, his architecture." She paused. "He didn't chase attention, he built legacy." My father blinked. My mother covered her mouth softly. Aunt Liz's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "But Uncle Ron," he chuckled awkwardly. "Well, I'll be damned." Sabrina leaned back, her voice gentler now. "You know, I used to think Caleb was wasting time, that silence meant he had nothing to say. But now I know better. Sometimes silence is where the real work happens." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was complete. My mother reached over and touched my wrist, pride written in the wrinkles beside her eyes. Across the table, Sabrina gave me one small nod. Not performative, not loud, but honest. When the meal ended and people began to drift toward hugs and goodbyes, Sabrina stood beside me with her coat in hand. She didn't rush. She didn't turn away. As she passed, she whispered, just loud enough for only me to hear, "You don't have to forgive me, but I'll never be the same person again." I turned to her and, for the first time in a very long while, gave her a smile that reached all the way into my chest. "I know," I said, "and I never needed you to apologize." We walked out of the brunch spot together. Not side by side, not holding hands like movie siblings, just two people walking in the same direction, for once at the same pace. The sky outside was pale blue, the breeze was soft, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally walking forward, with someone who no longer looked through me, but walked beside me with her eyes open. That afternoon, after everyone had gone home and the plates had been cleared, I walked the long way back to my apartment. Not because I needed time to think, there was nothing left to decide, but because I hadn't walked aimlessly in years. No meeting waiting, no code to push, just the sound of my own steps on a city sidewalk that felt gentler than it used to. Seattle's sky was brushed with soft gold, the kind of light that makes glass look like water and turns shadows into something kind. I passed by the lake. People were sitting on benches, sharing ice cream, walking dogs. No one recognized me, and I didn't want them to. By the time I got home, the light in my apartment was cool and quiet. I made a cup of tea, chamomile, my default on long days, and sat by the window. The same window I'd stared out of 100 times while debugging crash logs at 3 a.m., wondering if any of it was worth it. I took a sip and let the silence stretch. A message popped up on my phone. It was from Jake. He smiled, "Half bad today." I smiled. "He always knew more than he let on," I replied. "Not bad. Let's call it a new beginning." Then I set the phone down and opened my laptop. Not for work, but for something I hadn't done in months. I pulled up the internal Dataloom feed, clicked into the archived live stream of the gala, and skipped ahead to my speech. I didn't watch it to hear my own words. I just paused the frame where I stood under the lights, face visible for the first time, eyes steady. I studied it like I would study a line of code, not to judge, but to understand. What did she see that night? Standing in the back of that room, did she see a stranger? Or did she finally see her little brother? And did I, in that moment, finally see myself, not just as the builder, the fixer, the silent mind behind the system, but as someone allowed to stand in the light? Maybe. I didn't press play. I didn't need to. I closed the tab and let the screen go dark, the reflection of my apartment softly folding back over me. I looked around, not at the objects, but at the space. There was no noise, no urgency, just the hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the wall as the building breathed, and the warmth of tea between my hands. Forgiveness hadn't come in a grand apology. It had come in glances, in a hand stopping a glass from spilling, in a notebook with a few pages filled, in the way Sabrina's voice now made room for others, and in the way mine no longer trembled when I spoke. We would never be the picture-perfect siblings on a holiday card, but we didn't need to be. We were two people who had grown up, separately and silently, and somehow still found our way back into each other's lives with grace instead of resentment. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something in me had. I no longer felt the need to hide, and I no longer felt the need to be seen. Somewhere in between those two extremes, I'd found a kind of freedom. The kind you don't announce or post about, but one you feel in the quiet, steady rhythm of a life finally aligned with its truth. I took another sip of tea. Outside, the sun dipped below the skyline, and inside, For the first time in years, everything was still, and it was enough. Not every story ends with applause. Some just soften. They don't explode into grand gestures or sweeping reconciliations. Instead, they leave behind a quiet kind of warmth, like the final glow of sunlight on your living room floor before the evening settles in. And that's what this story was. Not about revenge, not about proving someone wrong, but about growing up without letting your scars grow over your eyes. Caleb never raised his voice. He never tried to steal the spotlight or rewrite the family script with a sudden speech or dramatic reveal. He simply stayed true to the work, stayed true to his silence, and when the moment came, stayed kind. And that might be the rarest kind of strength there is. We live in a world that tells us loudly that we have to be seen to matter, that if people don't notice us, we must not be doing enough. But there are people, maybe you, maybe someone you love, who build their entire legacy in the quiet, who hold families together without medals, who write the backbone of teams, companies, or entire lives without asking for a title. They're the ones who pick up the glass before it spills, who nod instead of interrupt, who forgive without making it a ceremony. And sometimes it takes years for those around them to truly see them. Sabrina's journey wasn't about shame. It was about clarity, about realizing that noise isn't the same as value, that presence can speak louder than performance. She didn't fall apart when the truth came. She opened up, not all at once, but in the way that matters most. Through action, through showing up differently, through asking better questions, through learning to listen. Forgiveness didn't arrive in a bow-tied scene or an Instagram-ready hug. It came in the spaces between. A notebook filled with honest thoughts, a public word of respect at a brunch table, a quiet shift in how someone chooses to lead. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not fixing the past, but building a future where we don't make the same mistakes, where we give each other space to grow into better versions without demanding perfect explanations along the way. So, if you're watching this and thinking about someone you misjudged or someone who misjudged you, maybe you don't need to draft a big speech or wait for the perfect moment to clear the air. Maybe all it takes is one open door, a gesture, a pause, a choice to walk beside, even if the path back wasn't smooth. Because in the end, it's not about who was right. It's about who was willing to start over without keeping score. And maybe, just maybe, that's what freedom really is. If this story spoke to something quiet inside you, if you've ever been the Caleb in someone's life, or if you're realizing you might have been the Sabrina, we invite you to stay with us a little longer. This channel is a place for stories like this, about truth, family, quiet strength, and the kind of growth that takes years, not headlines. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to walk with us on more journeys like this. We don't promise perfection, but we do promise stories that see you even when the world doesn't. Until next time, may your silence be your strength, and may someone, somewhere, finally see you as you are.